My marriage ended on a Tuesday afternoon while I was presenting budget forecasts to the executive team at Westlake Financial. My phone vibrated in my pocket once, twice, 3 times. I ignored it. 6 minutes later, as I was explaining the projected Q3 revenue growth, it buzzed again. And again. Something persistent was happening outside this boardroom, but inside, I had the full attention of 7 executives who controlled the future of my department. I wrapped up the presentation at 3:47 p.m., fielded questions for another 12 minutes, and only when the CFO nodded his approval of my projections did I finally check my phone in the hallway. 5 text messages from my wife, Vanessa. I can't do this anymore. I've filed for divorce. I'm not coming back to the house. Don't try to contact me for a while. I'll have my lawyer reach out about arrangements. I deserve to be happy. I stood frozen in the corridor, other employees brushing past me as I stared at my screen. 15 years of marriage reduced to 5 text messages, 163 characters total. No warning. No discussion. No explanation beyond I deserve to be happy. My first instinct was to call her, of course. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again with the same result, then sent a text asking for a conversation. No response. I don't remember driving home. I must have said goodbye to colleagues, gathered my laptop, walked to the parking garage, and navigated rush hour traffic, but all I recall is standing in our kitchen. No, my kitchen now, still wearing my suit jacket. Staring at our wedding photo on the refrigerator. Vanessa and I had met in graduate school. She was studying art history, I was finishing my MBA. We were opposites in many ways. She was creative, spontaneous, socially graceful. I was analytical, planned, sometimes awkward at parties. But we balanced each other. Or I thought we did. There had been no signs, at least none I'd recognized. We'd had dinner together just the previous night. She'd told me about a new exhibition she was helping curate at the museum where she worked. I'd shared anecdotes from my day. We'd watched an episode of that cooking competition she enjoyed. Everything had seemed normal. But apparently, while I'd been preparing budget forecasts, she'd been filing divorce papers. While I'd been projecting Q3 growth, she'd been texting me goodbye. I pulled out my phone again, this time to check our joint accounts. Vanessa and I maintained separate accounts for our individual spending but shared a joint checking and savings for household expenses and our financial goals. We'd been saving for a vacation home in Colorado, somewhere we could eventually retire. The joint checking account, which had contained around $7,400 that morning, now showed a balance of $218.33. The joint savings account, which had held $147,856.22, 15 years of careful deposits toward our shared dreams, was empty. A withdrawal for the entire amount had been processed at 2:15 p.m., approximately an hour before she'd sent the divorce texts. My hands began to shake. Not from emotion exactly, but from a kind of stunned system overload. In the span of 3 hours, my wife had emptied our accounts and ended our marriage via text message. The magnitude of the betrayal was so enormous that I couldn't process it emotionally yet. Instead, my analytical mind took over, the same part of me that handled financial crises at work. I sat at the kitchen counter, opened my laptop, and began taking inventory of our financial situation. I had my personal checking and savings accounts, my 401k, and some stock options through work. Vanessa couldn't access those. We jointly owned the house with a mortgage that was about 60% paid off. Both our names were on the cars. We had no children to consider, just a 7-year-old retriever named Cooper who was currently watching me with confused eyes from his bed in the corner. "It's okay, Coop," I said automatically, though nothing was okay. I needed to protect what remained of my assets and understand what had just happened. I called James Whitaker, an attorney friend who specialized in family law. "I need advice," I said when he answered. "Urgently." "Professional or personal?" he asked. "My wife just texted that she's filed for divorce and emptied our joint accounts." There was a brief pause. "Jesus, Michael? Come to my office." Now, James's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown. When I arrived 45 minutes later, he was waiting at the door. "Let's go straight to the conference room," he said, forgoing his usual handshake. I followed him through the reception area, aware of my rumpled appearance and the shocked expression I couldn't quite manage to remove from my face. "Tell me everything," James said once we were seated. I recounted the texts, the emptied accounts, the complete absence of warning. James took notes, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "Have you checked your credit cards? Other financial accounts? Safety deposit boxes?" I shook my head. "Just the joint checking and savings so far." "Do that now," he instructed, sliding a legal pad toward me. "Make a list of every financial account, property, and valuable asset you share. Everything." As I compiled the list, James excused himself and returned with 2 bottles of water and his paralegal, Sonia. "Sonia is going to help us file emergency motions," he explained. "Michael, withdrawing all the funds from joint accounts immediately before filing for divorce is not looked upon favorably by family court judges. It suggests financial misconduct and an attempt to hide marital assets." "So I can get the money back?" "Eventually, yes. But we need to act quickly to establish a record of what happened and prevent further withdrawals or asset transfers." For the next 2 hours, we worked methodically. I checked every account I could think of. Credit cards were intact, but Vanessa had withdrawn $5,000, the daily maximum, from a line of credit we rarely used. My personal accounts were untouched. The safety deposit box key was still in my desk drawer at home, but I couldn't check the contents until morning. James prepared emergency motions to freeze remaining assets and compel disclosure of the withdrawn funds. Sonia helped me draft a detailed accounting of what had been taken. By 8:30 p.m., we had a plan in place for filing first thing in the morning. "Where are you staying tonight?" James asked as we wrapped up. "At home," I said, surprised by the question. "Are you sure that's wise?" "If Vanessa shows up, she won't," I said with certainty. "She never does anything halfway. If she's left, she's gone completely." James nodded slowly. "All right, but call me if anything changes. And don't contact her tonight. Let the legal process begin before any communication." I agreed, thanked him, and headed home to my empty house and confused dog. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had there been signs I missed? Was there someone else? Had she been planning this for weeks, months? I scrolled through photos on my phone. Vacations, dinner dates, ordinary moments from our shared life. Nothing indicated the catastrophe that had been building. In our last photo together, taken just 10 days earlier at her colleague's retirement party, she was smiling with her arm around my waist. Then I remembered something odd. 3 weeks ago, Vanessa had asked me a hypothetical question over dinner. If we ever separated, would I want to keep the house? I'd answered without much thought, saying I probably would since my office was nearby. She'd nodded and changed the subject so quickly that I hadn't given it another thought. It hadn't been hypothetical at all. She'd been planning. Around 4 a.m. I got up and went to her home office. I needed to understand what else I might have missed. Vanessa and I each had our own desks on opposite sides of the room. Hers was typically cluttered with museum catalogs, art books, and sticky notes. But when I turned on the light, I found her desk completely cleared. The drawers were empty except for a few paper clips and rubber bands. She'd removed everything personal, but done it so gradually that I hadn't noticed. The art books had disappeared first, then the framed photo of her parents, then her collection of ceramic paperweights. Item by item, she'd been erasing herself from our home while I was too preoccupied with work to see it. I sank into her desk chair, finally allowing myself to feel something beyond shock. Not sadness, not yet. Anger, yes, at the deception. But mostly a cold, focused determination. Vanessa had calculated her exit down to the minute, filing papers, emptying accounts, sending texts, all precisely timed and executed. I respected the strategy in a detached sort of way. But she had miscalculated one critical factor. She had married an analyst. Planning, projecting outcomes, identifying weaknesses in systems, this was what I did professionally. And now I would apply those skills to understanding exactly what had happened and ensuring I wasn't left financially devastated by her exit strategy. I opened my laptop and began searching for digital breadcrumbs. By morning, I had discovered several things. First, Vanessa had opened a new email account 3 months earlier. I found evidence in the browser history on our shared tablet. Second, she'd been researching divorce attorneys as far back as January based on partially cleared search history. Third, a credit card statement showed a consultation payment to a law firm I didn't recognize, dated 6 weeks ago. Most significantly, I found a real estate listing she'd bookmarked, a luxury condo downtown, near the museum where she worked. The price tag was just under what she'd withdrawn from our accounts. I called James as I drove to his office at 7:30 a.m. "She's buying property," I told him. "A condo downtown. That's where our savings went." "That makes this much simpler," James replied. "Real estate transactions create clear paper trails. We'll subpoena those records immediately." At his office, we finalized the emergency motions and sent a paralegal to file them at the courthouse when it opened. Then James leaned back in his chair and asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Michael, do you know why this is happening? Affairs are usually the catalyst for exits this abrupt." I had considered the possibility, of course. But nothing in my overnight investigation had suggested another person. "I don't think so," I said slowly. "This seems calculated around money and property, not emotions." James nodded. "That fits with the financial moves. But keep your eyes open. Understanding her motivation will help us anticipate her next steps." By noon, we had confirmation that our motions had been filed and a hearing was scheduled for the following week. I went to the bank to check the safety deposit box and found it untouched. The small amount of jewelry and documents inside were still there. I also spoke with my HR department about removing Vanessa from my insurance and benefits. Through it all, I maintained a strange, detached calm. Colleagues who knew about the situation commented on how well I was handling it. But the truth was, I wasn't processing it emotionally yet. I was treating my divorce like a complex work problem, gathering data, analyzing patterns, developing countermeasures. That approach served me well over the next few weeks. Vanessa's attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Catherine Dawson, contacted James with their initial demands. They wanted the house, half my retirement accounts, and ongoing spousal support based on the difference in our incomes. In exchange, they would allow me to keep my personal accounts and one of our 2 cars. "It's an absurd opening position," James assured me, "especially given the financial misconduct with the joint accounts. They're hoping you'll be emotionally devastated enough to concede more than you should." But I wasn't emotionally devastated. I was methodical. And as we prepared for our first hearing, I made another interesting discovery. Our home security system kept cloud backups of footage for 60 days. Reviewing those recordings, I found something curious. On multiple occasions when I was working late, an unfamiliar car had parked briefly in front of our house. The driver never got out, but Vanessa would sometimes step outside, speak with them for a few minutes, then return inside. The visits were always brief, never more than 5 minutes. The resolution wasn't good enough to identify the driver, but the car was distinctive, an older model Jaguar with a small dent in the rear fender. I reported this to James, who raised an eyebrow. "Could be nothing. Could be something. Let's add it to our information gathering." The initial hearing went exactly as James had predicted. The judge was not impressed by the emptying of joint accounts and issued a temporary order for Vanessa to return half the withdrawn funds to a court-controlled account. Her attorney argued that Vanessa had already used the funds as a down payment on a residence and couldn't access them. Then she can take out a loan against the property, the judge replied firmly. I want those funds secured within 7 days. Outside the courtroom, I caught my first glimpse of Vanessa since the text messages. She looked different somehow, hair styled in a way I'd never seen, wearing clothes that seemed to belong to someone else's life. She didn't meet my eyes as she hurried past with her attorney. That evening, I received my first direct communication from her since the texts. An email with the subject line, "Be reasonable. Michael, my attorney tells me you're being difficult about the finances. I hope you won't drag this out unnecessarily. We both know your career has always come first, and I've supported that priority for 15 years. Now I need to prioritize my happiness. If you make this ugly, nobody wins. I'm prepared to be generous about the division of assets if you'll be reasonable." Vanessa, the email was so disconnected from reality that I actually laughed out loud. She had emptied our accounts without warning, tried to claim our house after specifically asking if I would want to keep it, and now she was positioning herself as the reasonable party prepared to be generous. I forwarded the email to James without responding to Vanessa. His reply came minutes later, "This is good. She's worried about the hearing outcome. We hold firm." 2 days later, Vanessa complied with the judge's order, depositing half the withdrawn funds into the court-controlled account. But our investigation was just beginning. James had hired a financial investigator who specialized in divorce cases, and she was methodically tracking down every transaction, account, and asset transfer over the past year. What she found was illuminating. 9 months earlier, Vanessa had opened a separate bank account at an institution where we had no other relationship. Small transfers, $500 here, $800 there, had been flowing from our joint account to this hidden account for months, always just below the threshold that would generate a notification to me. In total, she'd diverted nearly $27,000 before the final large withdrawals. Even more interesting was where some of that money had gone. Regular payments had been made to something called Horizon Consulting, an LLC registered just last year. The financial investigator traced the LLC to its owner, Lawrence Bishop, the museum's director of development. "Bishop," I repeated when James shared this information. "About 6 feet tall, gray hair, drives a Jaguar?" James raised an eyebrow. "I don't know what he drives." "Why?" I showed him the security footage of the mysterious car visits. "I think we've found our connection." Further investigation revealed that Lawrence Bishop was 61, married for 32 years, and earned significantly more than Vanessa or me. The payments to his consulting company had begun shortly after Vanessa began working directly with him on a major exhibition. "It might not be romantic," James cautioned. "Could be some kind of kickback scheme or legitimate side business." "Either way, it's relevant," I replied. "She's been hiding money and relationships. The judge should know." As we prepared for the next hearing, I maintained my external calm. I went to work, walked Cooper, kept up with friends. But inside, something was shifting. The shock had worn off, and in its place was a clear-eyed understanding of what had happened. Vanessa hadn't just left me. She had methodically planned to extract maximum financial benefit while contributing a manufactured narrative about her happiness and my supposed neglect. The strategic analyst in me almost admired the planning. Almost, but she had overlooked something crucial. Information asymmetry works both ways. She didn't know what I knew, and she had no idea what was coming. The second hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. 2 days before, I received another email from Vanessa. "Michael, I've been reflecting on our situation and feel we should try to resolve this amicably. Would you be open to meeting with me and our attorneys to discuss a settlement? I believe we can find a fair resolution without further court involvement." "Vanessa," I forwarded it to James with one question. "Why the sudden interest in settling?" His reply was immediate. She's worried about something. Let's find out what at the hearing. The morning of the hearing, I arrived early with James and our financial investigator. Vanessa and Catherine arrived just minutes before the scheduled start, engaged in intense whispered conversation. As we were called into the courtroom, I noticed Lawrence Bishop slip into the back row of the gallery. Interesting. The hearing began with standard procedural matters, but shifted when our financial investigator was called to present her findings. She methodically detailed the hidden account, the regular transfers, and the payments to Horizon Consulting LLC. With each revelation, Vanessa's posture grew more rigid. And who owns Horizon Consulting? James asked. Horizon Consulting LLC is registered to Lawrence Bishop, who is employed as Director of Development at the Carleton Museum of Fine Arts, where Mrs. Harrison also works. Catherine Dawson immediately objected, claiming this information was irrelevant to the division of marital assets. The judge overruled her. Mrs. Harrison's financial activities prior to filing for divorce are absolutely relevant, especially given the irregular withdrawal of joint funds. Please continue. Our investigator then revealed records of text and call patterns between Vanessa and Lawrence, hundreds of communications, often late at night or early morning, going back more than a year. Not definitive proof of an affair, but certainly suggestive of more than a professional relationship. When the investigator finished, James called me to testify. I described finding the accounts emptied, receiving divorce notification by text, and discovering the security footage of the Jaguar visits. And have you identified the vehicle in that footage? James asked. Yes, I replied. It matches the vehicle registered to Lawrence Bishop, who I believe is in the courtroom today. All eyes turned to the back row where Bishop sat with a stunned expression. He hadn't expected to be identified. Catherine requested a brief recess to consult with her client. The judge granted 15 minutes. As they huddled in the hallway, I watched Lawrence Bishop slip out of the courtroom, avoiding eye contact with everyone. When court resumed, Catherine's tone had changed completely. Your Honor, in light of the morning's testimony, my client would like to propose an immediate settlement conference. We believe we can reach an equitable resolution without further court proceedings. The judge looked at James. Counsel? We're certainly open to settlement discussions, James replied smoothly, but given the pattern of financial concealment revealed today, we would request continued judicial supervision of all marital assets pending such an agreement. The judge nodded. So ordered. I'll schedule a settlement conference for next week. In the meantime, Mrs. Harrison, I'm issuing an order prohibiting any further disposal or transfer of assets acquired during the marriage, including those held in your name alone or transferred to third parties with the intent of removing them from the marital estate. Is that understood? Vanessa nodded stiffly. As we left the courtroom, I finally made eye contact with my wife. For the first time since I'd met her 15 years earlier, Vanessa looked uncertain. She had no idea what was still coming. The settlement conference was scheduled for the following Wednesday. On Monday morning, James called with news. The museum's board of trustees held an emergency meeting yesterday, he said. Lawrence Bishop has been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into financial irregularities. Financial irregularities? Apparently someone sent them documentation of payments from the museum to Horizon Consulting for services that cannot be verified, along with evidence that Bishop approved Vanessa's unusually rapid promotion and salary increases. I hadn't known about this aspect of their relationship. She was promoted 3 times in the past year, according to the information provided to the board. Each promotion coincided with a new payment to Horizon. Who sent this information to the board? James paused. The documentation was anonymous, but it was extremely thorough, the kind of detailed financial analysis that, say, a senior financial analyst might produce. I said nothing. James continued. In related news, Bishop's wife has apparently consulted with a divorce attorney. Word gets around in our profession. The dominoes were falling, but not by my direct hand. I had simply made certain that accurate information reached those who needed it, the judge, the museum board, perhaps a few other interested parties. What they did with that information was their choice. At the settlement conference, Vanessa arrived alone. Catherine explained that they had mutually agreed to terminate their attorney-client relationship and Vanessa would be representing herself temporarily. "I just want this over with," Vanessa said, her voice hollow. "I'll sign whatever's fair." Her definition of fair had evolved considerably since her initial demands. She no longer wanted the house, would return all the remaining funds from the joint accounts, and asked only for her personal property and car. No alimony, no claim on my retirement accounts. "What about the condo?" I asked, my first direct question to her since the text messages. "I'm selling it," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I can't. I need to relocate." James and I stepped out to confer privately. "This is a complete capitulation," he said. "Better terms than we could have achieved even with a sympathetic judge. Is there a catch? Besides the fact that she's clearly desperate to conclude this matter before further revelations? No legal catch that I can see. But Michael, are you satisfied with this outcome? You'd be fully within your rights to pursue the hidden funds, the payments to Bishop, potentially even claims related to their professional relationship." I considered this. The analyst in me had mapped out multiple scenarios, including ones where I pursued Vanessa and Lawrence to the fullest extent possible. But something else had emerged during this process, a desire to be free of these entanglements, to close this chapter decisively. "I just want it over," I said, echoing Vanessa's words but with a different meaning. "Let's draft the agreement." 2 hours later, we had a signed settlement. Vanessa would vacate the condo within 30 days, return all remaining funds from the joint accounts, and retain only her personal property, car, and the contents of her individual accounts minus the $27,000 she diverted over the past year, which would be returned to me. I would keep the house, my retirement accounts, and all other assets. Clean, simple, and heavily weighted in my favor. As we concluded the paperwork, Vanessa finally spoke directly to me. "You planned all of this," she said quietly. "From the moment you got my texts, you were 3 steps ahead." "No," I corrected her. "I simply responded to the situation you created. You planned an exit. I planned a response. The museum board, Lawrence's wife, that was all you, wasn't it?" I shrugged. "Information wants to be free. I just helped it along." She studied me with a look I'd never seen before, part respect, part fear. "I didn't think you had it in you. You were always so predictable." "Analytical," I corrected. "There's a difference. Analysts don't just crunch numbers, Vanessa. We identify patterns, project scenarios, and develop strategic responses. You triggered a particular scenario. I responded accordingly." As she gathered her purse to leave, I added one final thought. "By the way, Cooper stays with me. He's mentioned specifically in the agreement, in case you were thinking of taking him when you collect your things." Her expression confirmed she had indeed been considering it. One last emotional blow she could deliver. But I'd anticipated that too. "Goodbye, Michael," she said stiffly, and walked out of the conference room. James watched her go, then turned to me with a raised eyebrow. "For someone who's been through what you have, you seem remarkably at peace." "Not peace," I said, watching Vanessa's retreating figure through the glass walls. "Closure. There's a difference." 3 months later, I was settling into my new normal. The divorce was finalized with minimal additional complications. Vanessa had moved to Chicago for a position at a smaller museum, a significant step down from her previous role. Lawrence Bishop had resigned from the Carleton Museum amid an expanding investigation into financial improprieties. His wife had filed for divorce, reportedly with significantly better terms than he'd hoped for. I remained in our house, my house now with Cooper, Work continued to go well. I'd received a promotion to Senior Director of Financial Planning. Ironically, on the same day my divorce was finalized. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. One evening as I was walking Cooper through the neighborhood, my phone rang. An unknown number. "Hello, Michael." Vanessa's voice. I need to ask you something." I waited silently. The job in Chicago. 3 other candidates were suddenly disqualified the week I interviewed. The apartment I found, the only one available in my price range near the museum. The loan approval that came through in record time despite my credit issues. Her voice had a slight tremor. "Was that all you?" I watched Cooper sniffing happily at a neighbor's mailbox. "What do you think?" "I think you managed to both punish and save me simultaneously," she said. "And I don't understand why." "It wasn't punishment, Vanessa. It was consequences. There's a difference." "And the help? Getting me out of town, settled somewhere new." I considered how to explain. 15 years is a long time. Despite how things ended, I didn't want to destroy you. I just needed you to understand what happens when you underestimate someone. There was a long pause. "I never really knew you at all, did I?" "Probably not," I acknowledged. "But that goes both ways. Is there anything else you needed?" "No," she said after a moment. "I just wanted to know if my suspicions were correct." "Goodbye, Michael." "Goodbye, Vanessa." As I slipped the phone back into my pocket, I felt the last piece fall into place. Our story was finished. Not the way either of us had expected, but decisively. Cooper tugged at his leash, eager to continue our walk. I obliged, moving forward with steady steps. Vanessa had divorced me by text and emptied our joint accounts, thinking she'd orchestrated the perfect exit strategy. She'd had no idea what was coming. Not revenge, exactly, but a methodical, comprehensive response that ensured justice and closure on my terms. The analyst in me had prevailed, transforming a potential tragedy into a strategic resolution. Some people underestimate the quiet ones, the planners, the analysts. They mistake our deliberation for weakness, our patience for passivity. Vanessa had made that mistake. Only after everything unraveled did she realize the truth. She'd never really known what I was capable of. And that, perhaps, was the most valuable lesson of all.